Welcome to the Naked Soul podcast, where we dissolve the barriers between spirituality and the human experience.
Here, we embrace the full spectrum of your journey, celebrating the highs and the lows, the glimmers and the triggers.
Our mission is to dive deep into the candid conversations that everyone thinks about but few talk about, breaking the silence and removing the stigma around the complexities of being human.
Whether you're on a healing journey, an entrepreneurial path, or anywhere in between.
If you're ready to shatter the notions of spirituality being all love and light and embrace radical honesty and acceptance of your soul's journey here, let's strip away the layers and let's get naked. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Naked Soul podcast. And today we are talking about the soul growth, and the path of raising consciousness. So with these topics, why it would be helpful to understand them, basically it gives you a better understanding of why we are here, what the purpose of life is, and when you have this understanding, it can help you navigate life with greater ease and less suffering. So Laurie, when you do sessions with clients, a lot of questions that they have are, what is my purpose? Why am I going through this? What am I here on this life, in this life to do?
Yeah, a lot of the times what brings a client to a session with me is that there's some form of suffering or blocks that are happening in their life that they don't understand, they don't know how to move through it, they don't know why it's happening, and they're really in this place of powerlessness and really feeling in the dark. And a lot of times the question comes through of like, yeah, well, like, why is this happening to me? Or why is this happening to me again? Because a lot of the times, I don't know about our listeners, but life can feel a little bit like Groundhog Day.
Going through the same lessons over and over. Not this again.
So much repetition and maybe different faces, but very similar relationship patterns and trauma patterns. And so when we're feeling this like helplessness of like, oh my God, life is just happening to us, then we're really in our powerlessness.
Yeah.
And all of my teachings basically come from more of like a bird's eye view perspective of why we're here as a soul experiencing life in a physical body in order to grow. And so I always say that growth comes from learning lessons, and lessons present themselves as challenges. And the easiest and most tangible way for me to explain this is really to look at it as being a school setting.
Right.
So we're here experiencing life on Earth, so that makes Earth our schooling ground.
And we're experiencing life as a soul, but in a physical body.
Exactly.
Okay.
So soul plus physical body equals what we would call like your entity, right? So you are here as Shawna, I am here as Laurie. That's the experience that we're having in this life.
Right.
And a lot of people have like a conceptual understanding of I have a soul or I am a soul. But I think it's less talked about like, well, what is a soul?
Right.
Because we think of it as just being kind of abstract.
Yeah.
When actually the soul is a powerhouse of energy. So it is a energy being that is eternal. And after this lifetime, you'll have another lifetime and another lifetime and another lifetime. And I also always love to say, like, this is what I believe. These are my teachings. This is what resonates with me. And I always encourage people to find what feels best for them.
Take what resonates, leave what doesn't.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean that at some point in time, something new might not resonate with you. Because I've definitely had that on my journey where the first time I heard something or the second time I was like, nope, I don't like that. I'm not ready to believe that like these bad, quote unquote, bad things are happening to me for a reason. But sometimes just as you grow and evolve and keep living, you start to see how these truths are maybe showing up in your life. So the soul is eternal. And when we talk about the soul separate from the physical body as just being this powerhouse of energy, it's all love and light. It was created from God consciousness. And when we are outside of the physical body, we have access to all knowledge.
Right.
But if you think about, so it's like, okay, well, then why do we need to grow?
Yeah. Yeah. Why can't we just have all this information?
Why can't we just like stay up there in soul world having all of this information? And I liken this to being a baby as well. When you are a baby, you are as close to your true self as you really ever will be, because you don't have all this conditioning, societal conditioning, conditioning from your parents, conditioning from traumas, but you also are immature, right? And I always say, at some point in time, your child is going to hit another child or bite another child, not because there's anything wrong with them, but just because they don't know any better. And it's only by teaching that child why we don't do that the child learns.
Right.
And that learning, the lesson being the growth. So it's the same for our souls. When our soul is in soul world, we have access to all knowledge, but not because we have worked or had lived experience to gain that knowledge, meaning we don't truly understand it. It's not stored in like what you would almost call like your vibrational frequency. So you enter the physical body, you open your eyes, and you're like, I have no idea why I'm here.
Yeah, you forget. Yeah.
I don't know what I came here to do. And you also don't have all the answers. So the physical body creates this limited perspective for the soul. So we no longer have access to all knowledge.
Yep.
And it's encouraging us to grow. So the process is always like forgetting to remember. So we came here to forget so that we could learn and remember our truths.
Yep.
The truths being that we are all love. We are all light. But again, we can only do this through the process of not having the answers and going out and finding them.
Right.
So we have the teaching ground, we have the soul as being the student, soul plus physical body being the student. We would say that our teacher is God, source, universe, whatever it is that you resonate with, knowing that there is always a higher power that is guiding us and with us. We're never alone, ever. But then what's missing from the school setting? Well, there's the grading system, first of all. So when we go into school, we have grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And so in this soul setting, that would be the dimensions. First dimension, second dimension, third dimension. And the dimensions are levels of consciousness. And everybody on this planet is currently experiencing life in the third dimension.
Right.
And just like each grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, has kind of a building on the lessons. In the third dimension, we're currently experiencing duality.
Right.
And duality is the balance of the darkness and the light. So there's 50% non-loving emotions and there's 50% loving emotions. But in the third dimension, we are actually all programmed to focus on the negative.
Yeah.
Because that's the forgetting that we've come here to remember, our truths. And there's 3 things in particular that we struggle with in the third dimension, and that's overcoming negativity. And by overcoming negativity, that means staying positive in despite of the negative. This isn't bypassing your emotions. This isn't not feeling it. This is the remembering. Because there is just as much love on this planet as there is hate. There's as much positivity as there is negativity. And it's a choice to move back to that despite the circumstances.
Yeah. And I always think too, positivity equaling love, right? Where it's like, even amidst darkness and struggle, you can offer yourself love. You can maintain a loving perspective. You could offer love to others. And I feel like that would be overcoming negativity, right? You're choosing love.
100%.
Yeah.
Just this last weekend, I brought my stepkids to Canada's Wonderland. And it was a very stressful day where lots of things were going wrong. I lost the electronic tickets. I was almost going to have to pay, for 5 tickets instead of 3. We got trapped in a storm. Like, all this stuff was happening, but I still managed to, woman in front of me in line was like, could my kid ride with you? He doesn't have an adult to ride with him. Yeah. And then we're in line at Tim Hortons, and the woman in front of me or behind me turns to me after I paid and said, I only have cash and they're only accepting credit card. Would you pay for my order and I'll give you cash? Yes. So despite, and these are small examples, just the ones that have most frequently happened to me recently, there's a choice to, despite the stress, still act out of a place of love.
Yeah. And all challenging emotions and challenging situations actually need love. That's what they need.
Yeah.
And for example, in my own life, it's like when I was struggling with depression and anxiety, and with that can come like frustration and anger at the world. But if you're staying in that place, it doesn't actually help you get out of it. You know, it just continues to fuel.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you're saying, it's not ignoring your feelings or spiritual bypassing or anything like that. Yes, we have to dive deep and feel and go through it, which we talked about in episode 1. But then at the end of the day, all of those challenging emotions and all those, say, stress and wounds need love.
Yeah. And sometimes it's easier to give love to other people than ourselves.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of people struggle with like the self-love and the self-compassion.
Yeah.
So sometimes recognizing these little moments that you have an opportunity to act out of love for another person, it's like it just reflects back onto you, and you can kind of see like, oh wow, I'm a good person.
Yeah.
Right? And not coming out of a place of like trying to be a good person, because I think that at the end of the day, what you really want to get to is just that these are kind of ingrained patterns in you through practice of like, yes, I hold the door open for people, right? Yes, when I see something that I like in somebody else, I'm going to compliment it. And through practice of, you know, you're in your negative state of mind and you get out of that and you look for the positive and you look for the love, you start to see it more, and you start to act out of love more easily. And so this is how we grow through this challenge of, okay, well, we're programmed to focus on the negative, but we can teach ourselves to shift to the positive.
Yeah.
The other challenging thing about the third dimension is that we believe that sight is our most dominant sense.
Right.
So many people are like, I have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
And the truth is, and I'm sure you can teach about this in maybe this episode or another episode when it comes to co-creation, law of attraction, is that it takes longer for the physical to manifest.
Yeah.
And it all starts with the emotional.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So you have to believe it before you can physically see it to even have the physical manifestation of it.
Yeah. Like we actually have it all backwards.
Yeah.
Which is a mind trip.
It really is.
And I think this is why people struggle with law of attraction and manifestation, because they're like, well, I don't want to have to like think it before it's actually reality. Like it's not my reality. But that's actually how the universe works. The universe works by responding to
your energy,
your internal state. So yeah, it's a mind trip.
It really is. And the last of those 3 lessons of the third dimension being overcoming time. Because we're in this physical body and we have this physical experience, we're seeing day turn into night, and we're seeing the leaves change, and we're seeing the seasons change, and we're seeing our faces age, and it creates this perception that time is really real. And because of time, we start to make comparisons to other people where they are at this age, and we make all of these stories about why we're not where we think we should be. That's the important part, is think
or there's
we should
not
be.
enough time in the day.
There's not enough time in the day.
How can I get all this done? I feel like it creates like a pressure that then actually affects your vibration.
Yes.
And then that actually affects like, what's coming into your reality.
Yeah. And it's keeping us away from the truth of divine timing.
Yes.
And also that, because we talked about the soul being eternal, like the soul actually isn't in any rush.
Right. We create such a rush and like a pressure, and it's actually doing the opposite.
We do. And I mean, I'll just call out probably every listener right now how often does your rushing actually serve you?
Exactly.
Because, and this is something that I have to remind myself all the time as somebody who got speeding tickets frequently when I was younger. It's like, okay, every time that I'm speeding and rushing to get somewhere because I believe I need to be there right now, if I got pulled over, how much further behind would that put me?
Yeah.
Right? And these are like the little things that I use to remind myself that, like, oh, actually to speed up is to slow down.
Right. Yeah.
Because when we rush, we make mistakes.
Yep. When we're rushing too and we're in that stressful state, we can't hear divine guidance. We can't hear our intuition as well. When we have a long to-do list and we're rushing in a stressful state, yeah, you're actually, I feel like you feel like you're trying to get things done to move forward, but I actually feel like it's doing the opposite because you're not in tune with like your soul. And yeah.
It's the brainwave patterns too, right? I always like the way, can you explain that?
Yeah, so when we are in a stress state, we're in the high beta brainwave activity, which looks like, if people are listening, then you can't see my hand, but I'm like drawing a bunch of jagged lines up and down, like mountains, basically, over and over and over again, but very, very jagged ones and squished together. And when that's happening, that's our brain waves when we're stressed. And when we're in that state, I always like to describe it as the universe and your soul, your higher self, is trying to speak to you and drop like divine guidance down. But if your mind's in this jagged state, I picture it as like divine guidance almost like hitting one of those mountain edges and like bouncing right off back into the ethers. And I picture like your spirit guides going like, no. Whereas if we do practices that actually slow our brain waves, there's so many different ones that do this, right? Meditation, yoga, going outside.
Just laying on the grass. Yeah,
laying on the ground. Just laying like even on the, I love just laying on the floor and like listening to calming music. That would put your brainwave in a slower state. But basically the EEG, which would be hooked up to you if like scientists were looking at your brainwaves, they would see a slower, more like wave, like instead of this jagged mountain, it's now like a nice flowing kind of wave. Picture like a pond, right? A nice calm pond. This is what your brainwaves have become. And then divine guidance and like clarity can just drop down into the pond and you're like, there's the answer.
The imagery that they just gave me is actually like a polygraph test. And because when you're lying,
exactly. It goes like that.
It's jagged. That's
exactly what it is. Yeah.
It's actually like when we're thinking out of our mind and we're feared and we're stressed out and we're kind of lying to ourselves, because a lot of times those stories are just stories. They're not the truth.
They're not the truth.
It's like, that jaggedness. And then when we're like telling the truth and we're so sure of ourselves, it's just this like straight line, and that's the soul. Yeah. So such a great way to think about it. But so that's the current level of consciousness that we're experiencing life in.
Those are the 3 challenges in this dimension.
But within every grade, there's the same subjects that we're learning. So we're always learning English, we're always learning science, math, all of these things. So similar to that, there are 7 areas of soul growth. And when we talk about these subjects, areas, whatever you want to call them, it's important to remember that growth for a soul is growth in emotional maturity. Right. So just like we talked about this baby who is immature, the soul, before it starts entering life in a physical body and having these experiences, is very immature. Right. So, and I'm sure everybody right now can think about at least a single person in their life that is less emotionally mature or less emotionally available than them. Right. Yep. And it's not to say that there's anything going wrong there, but just like in school, we have some people who are better in math. We have some people who are better in science because they've done it more times than us. Yep. And they've just grown. And so we're here to help those people, not by actually trying to like lift them up, by just being. I always teach my clients that we're forever the teacher and the student. Yeah. Right? I am the student in life, and everybody in my life is my teacher. Yep. But nobody is my student. Right? Because just by me being, I'm teaching.
Right. Yeah.
So you don't actually have to do anything other than just live.
Right.
Which is so beautiful and simple and hard to wrap our brains around.
Mm-hmm.
But so the 7 areas are love,
mm-hmm.
compassion, patience, gratitude, humility, joy, and sharing, in no particular order.
Mm-hmm.
And so by writing down these 7 lessons and looking at them, well, 2 things. You can go back to those 3 areas that we struggle in the 3rd dimension,
mm-hmm.
negativity, sight, and time. And you can ask yourself, okay, what's the situation that I'm struggling with right now in life? And can I see how it relates to these 3 struggles?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you can go a step further, because I'm just going to burst your bubble. It's going to relate to all 3 of them. You're going to notice how all 3 of these are interwoven
mm-hmm.
and kind of feed off of each other. But then you can kind of extrapolate from that the theme.
Yeah.
Right? Does it always come down to love, whether that's self-love or loving somebody else? Is it patience? Is it humility?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when we have this information, we can start to look at our struggles and actually see, this is what it's teaching me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is coming back to the truth of, actually, my experience here is not just one of suffering meaninglessly.
Yeah.
The suffering is contributing to a growth.
Yeah, a growth.
And all I have to do to crack the code on this lesson, so to speak, to kind of put an end to that Groundhog Day once and for all, is to say, oh, every single relationship is trying to teach me that I don't love myself.
Right.
Or every single relationship is trying to teach me that I don't have compassion for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you understand that, then it just becomes so much more simple to shift those thoughts into thoughts of love or thoughts of compassion. And the work that I do with my clients is ones of going to the root cause of, what was the event? What was the trauma that disconnected you from self-love?
Mm-hmm.
That disconnected you from self-compassion?
Mm-hmm.
Because the soul knows these things.
Right.
Right? But the ego mind doesn't. And so what was the event? What is the memory that is stored either in the conscious or the subconscious mind that is attracting these experiences?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can only attract what is within us.
Yeah.
I know that that's like really hard to hear, but I attracted every toxic relationship because I didn't love myself.
Yeah, there was a wound of lack of self-worth, maybe boundaries, lack of self-respect.
Yeah. And so it's so important and powerful to kind of identify that first event and reparent and heal, which will be great when we're talking about IFS, to give the listeners some tangible tools on how you can heal that inner child wound. But after we heal that inner child wound, it's all about taking accountability for our actions, because the initial event that happened to you is out of your control. But where we are continuing to suffer in life now is a choice.
Right.
And that's hard to hear.
Yep.
But I always say that pain is inevitable and suffering is a choice.
Absolutely.
Right? So that first painful event was inevitable. It was out of your control. It was guided by God for your growth. But it is now a choice to say, that isn't my reality anymore.
Yeah. And that's what I'm like not choosing to believe, basically. Like, I feel like so much of these growth lessons, especially love, I want to say love in particular, is really asking you, what do you believe about yourself? And what are you going to choose to believe about yourself? Yeah. And yeah, this has just become so obvious to me, where it's literally the universe is waiting for you to choose that you are worthy, that you are enough.
Yeah. And to remember, again, it's that like forgetting to remember that we aren't separate from love.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't separate from compassion.
Yeah.
We aren't separate. It's just this illusion created by the physical body, by our sight being the dominant sense, that we are separate, that we are different.
And we'll dive into that more in future episodes in terms of separation and oneness and non-duality. We can have a fun episode on that.
But I always love that one song lyric of like, everybody has a story that could break your heart. Because it's so easy to look at other people and perceive them as being separate from you.
Yeah.
And to project your stories onto them. And then once they tell you their story and you can relate to it or you can find some compassion for them, then that's not only the doorway for us to build healthier relationships, but for us to start to love ourselves. Because again, when we see ourselves in another person, and a lot of times I find it's so much harder to speak negatively to somebody else once you know their story than it is to speak to yourself. Right?
Yep.
So yeah, it's just so powerful.
Yeah. So let's go through these just quickly. So all of them, the 7 lessons, often they have to do with yourself and they have to do with others. So love, loving yourself, also loving others. Compassion, self-compassion, but compassion for others. Even like joy, finding joy and happiness within yourself, but being able to celebrate joy and happiness for other people.
Yes.
So love includes a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Because it would also include, like self-love, self-worth, setting healthy boundaries, personal power. Would you put that into love?
You know, I would say that for us to be in our power is like a combination of all of these.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
But yeah, as you talk about like loving ourselves and loving others and kind of that mirror of it, it really is, and I know we'll touch on it more, but it comes back to that perception of separation. Because everybody really talks about like, oh, you just have to love yourself.
Right.
You just have to like have all of this stuff within yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, but every single person in your life is a teacher for you and is a reflection of you and is you, right? Because we were all created from the same stream of consciousness. So if you can't love another person, if you can't have compassion for another person, you still don't truly have that love or compassion for yourself. Because you view them as being separate from you.
Right.
But to touch on it, each one of them briefly, love, I think, is actually the hardest one to explain. But within love is self-love as well. And when we talk about love, we still don't even talk about it at the highest vibration that love actually is, because love is authenticity.
Interesting.
Yeah. I remember having a girl on one of my retreats and she was like, actually, scientific studies say that the vibration of authenticity is higher than the vibration of love. To which I said, well, what is our gauge of what love is? Because none of us on this planet were truly taught unconditional love.
Right.
Right? So our idea of love is still based on what we believe is deemed to be lovable.
Okay.
Right? When you are your authentic self,
which would be your true self,
your true self,
your true essence.
Yeah. That little goofy girl or boy, right? Who was 4 years old and went up to everybody in the street and would say the wildest things and put on whatever clothes and just didn't care what anybody thought.
Goofy. Yourself.
When you were that version of yourself, you were your authentic self. And you didn't have any wounding yet to say, well, maybe somebody won't accept this or love this.
Yeah.
Right? You fully loved and accepted yourself. That is the highest and the truest form of love, is being in your authenticity.
Right. Which is like a natural expression of love.
And it's actually our natural state, right? That's so funny.
Yeah.
It's getting back to like, we just forgot it.
Yep, absolutely.
Because we had it at 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. And I know that some of us, our trauma started a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So I want to recognize that. But for a lot of us, we had it at those very young ages. And we forgot it.
And then we got taught all these different things as to why it would be unsafe to continue being our authentic selves, basically. And it can be all different things that taught us this, right? But we get taught to kind of shush or don't do that, or come do this, and
shame, guilt, fear.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's the fear, right? Like, our parents love us so much that they don't want to see us hurt because they don't want to hurt. And so they put their fears onto you of, well, if you are this way, XYZ will happen to you.
Right.
Yeah. Compassion is a tough one as well, because a lot of people can confuse compassion with empathy. And this might trigger a lot of listeners, but that's okay. Empathy is a trauma response.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when we are in empath, right, where we're saying, oh, I feel everybody's feelings very strongly, you can only feel what is alive within you.
Right.
You can't feel a wound that you don't have.
Interesting.
So when you're in empath and empathy and you're picking up on everybody else's feelings and feeling their feelings, it's because you're trying to save yourself through saving them.
Yeah. And it's when you're empathic and you feel everything, it was like a learned safety response.
A lot of empaths were children of narcissists. So they were trained to have to pick up on the emotions of the parent.
Right, yeah.
And navigate their... Yes, exactly. Yeah. So like 9 times out of 10 too, empaths attract narcissists because this is where the wound was originated.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because they're so good at picking up, because they had to be for survival. What kind of mood are they in? And what are they feeling? So it's a trauma response.
And I always like to say too, there's levels of everything, right? We can be extremely empathic from almost an extreme response, but then there's all different like levels of empathy based on like your own lived experience and what happened. So it's not like you're an empath or you're not. It's like there's all these varying kind of colors, you know?
And I mean, a lot of the times it comes from being highly intuitive, right? And we just haven't learned how to create that space between, pardon my language, our shit and their shit. And of course you couldn't as a child, right? Especially if we're kind of sticking with this situation of, if you were the child of a narcissist, the world revolves around the narcissist.
Right.
So there was never anybody to teach them, you're not responsible for mom's emotions. You're not responsible for dad's emotions. So that inherent belief and conditioning in them is, I'm responsible for the way that everybody else is feeling. So if they're feeling something and I'm picking up that they're feeling it, I have to figure out a way to make them better.
Right.
Because I'm responsible for it. And I think a lot of us relate to this on, again, like you said, like varying degrees. But compassion for me is the antidote to empathy.
And what is true compassion?
True compassion is understanding that every soul chose their experience that they're having here. And that nothing is going wrong.
Right. It's happening for their soul growth.
Yes. So when we are in empathy and we're looking at somebody else and we're saying, oh, poor them. We're making them a victim.
Right.
And when we make them a victim, we're forgetting that they are being guided by God. That they're having this experience to grow. And we're actually not helping anybody ever by taking pity on them. Right? So having compassion is holding that space and saying, I see you. Like, I see what you're going through. And like, how can I help you without taking away your opportunity to grow?
And what they need to get from the situation.
Having compassion is really just like sticking around and being available for this person and showing them that you care. And not, because a lot of people, when we're in empathy as well, are enabling. And we're taking away the opportunity for the person to like do the hard thing.
Right. The deep dive.
Exactly. Which means we're taking away all of that reward that they're going to get on the other side of it.
I see that too with a lot of parents that come onto our retreats. and their children are going through hard times, and they just so desperately want to make it better, and they want to know how to make it better. And yeah, we always say to them in different ways where it's like, you don't know the reasons that they're going through this or what they can find on their own, you know, and how it becomes their own beautiful journey. And I just think of mine, you know, in terms of struggling so much with depression and anxiety, but finding it within myself to go seek help and seek answers and like find the ones that like genuinely spoke to me. Because my parents didn't know what meditation was or anything, you know. I was always like the youngest one in the group finding meditation back many years ago. But I just think if I hadn't have found that path on my own, you know, it would not have led me to where I am today.
And that's the thing. These things always have to start within us.
Yeah.
So that then we can trickle them out to other people. And so having that compassion for yourself of, oh, I went through all of these experiences. I had these traumas, but I'm giving myself the compassion now that I didn't get as a child. Mm-hmm. And then you see the positive effect that comes out of that. And you're like, oh, I'm so much better for like having, like, this is the lesson.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I learned from it.
Yeah.
And yes, I still have healing work to do. We all still have healing work to do, but I've gotten to a point through doing the work where I can honestly say that I don't regret a single bad thing that happened to me.
No, me either.
Because they put me on this path to get here, right? And so when I can see that for myself, I think the clients that I've worked with for a long time, like I'm talking about like clients that I've worked with for like a year now, they know that sometimes if shit's hitting the fan in their life, I'll smile. Yeah. And I'll be like, but this is great.
And I was just going to say that myself, where I've come to a point in my life where I realize that any challenging phase or like anytime something feels sticky or hard or dark, I'm like, ooh, there's some lessons here that I'm going to learn. Yeah. But to learn them, you have to do the deep dive. Yeah. You know, you have to look at what you're feeling, why, you know, you have to do the human in order to almost reap those lessons.
But you do reach a point where you get excited about it, right? Like even us, beginning of 2024, once we could feel that shift happening. Yeah. And it's scary a little bit because we're like, oh, things are changing. Yeah. But also it's like, well, what's going to come out from this, right? Because I know what good has come out of my darkest days thus far, right? So it's always something good on the other side. Yep. And that's really having compassion, is like being there for the person through their hard shit, not trying to fix it, not trying to take it away, and just having so much like belief and faith and compassion for them. Yep. And like holding that for them.
I love that.
Yeah.
And patience.
Patience, I think we don't need to get
for itself.
We don't need to get too much into. You know, the other thing with patience as it ties into time is just remembering that your soul is not in a rush, right? Yes. So that's why it challenges us so much, because the body like forces us to slow down. Right. But the soul never tires, but it's also never in a rush. Yes. And so there's kind of this like, it almost creates like a cognitive dissonance between like, I feel like I should just be able to go, but my body says no. Yeah, absolutely. Because that forces us to slow down and learn patience. Yeah. The one time I feel like where we're actually could be operating off of too much patience or almost like false patience is when we are in misaligned relationships and we're kind of holding out for things to change. And we could have a whole episode on this. But I feel like that can be one place where we are acting like patience is a good thing, and sometimes it is, and there's obviously lots of work to do in relationships, so that can be done. But I also think that sometimes we are sitting too long in them. Yeah, for that, I would say, you know, you start deciphering the difference between patience and complacency. Yeah. And then that ties into self-love. Yeah. Back into love again. Yeah. Right. And it's just learning to, at the end of the day, what's going to help you with everything is tuning into how you feel in your body.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're feeling unhappy or depressed or anxious, then that's a sign that, okay, this isn't really love or patience or compassion or any of these things.
And if you're having these feelings within, but you're not bringing them up, you're not having difficult conversations, you're not looking at, reflecting on, is this my stuff? Is this their stuff? Is it a combo? But if you're not doing that, then you're falling into the complacency.
Yeah, it's just continuing to tune in to like, how am I really feeling?
Yeah, what's actually
am
true
I being
here?
honest with myself?
Yeah.
Right? Because if I was being honest with myself back in like 2020, before my relationship ended, I was like, well, we'll get married, maybe we'll have kids, but like, we're going to get divorced one day.
You just had that gut feeling.
Right? So why was Laurie keeping herself in a relationship where she was already planning to get divorced one day?
Yeah.
Right? Because I was too afraid to leave because of my low self-worth and self-love. Right? And once you recognize that, then you can't unsee it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gratitude. Gratitude is like
gratitude for this amazingness of life, and it's like becoming awake to the truth of life and like God and the experience of being.
Yeah.
And consciousness.
It can be quite complex because it also means having gratitude for, again, the quote unquote bad things that we would say are happening.
Yeah.
Because every experience is our teacher.
Yeah.
And to have the desired outcome, the big shiny happy thing at the end that's easy to be grateful for.
Yeah.
We have to be grateful for the path that it takes to get us there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But people love to use gratitude to bypass.
Okay. In what way?
And I'm just going to call out all the gratitude journals.
Oh, the gratitude journaling.
Gratitude practices are a great thing. They really are. But again, you have to tune into your body and ask yourself if it feels real.
Yeah.
Because if we're saying that we're grateful for things that we don't actually feel grateful for, we're not really doing the work. We're trying to bypass the work.
Well, the other thing we can do is we can write out all these things that we're grateful for, but we're not looking at the pile of stuff that's under the carpet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're just like, oh, let's sunshine, rainbows, good day, furry dog, all this stuff. And we're not
I do love doing. Yeah. I do love doing that, but you have to make sure you're looking under the carpet too.
Yeah. It's I always say like there's a time and a place.
Yeah.
And if you're at work or you're on call with a client and you're getting triggered, it's probably not the time for you to like be going through this process of lifting up the carpet and sweeping out under the dirt while you're trying to facilitate for this client, right?
Yeah.
So in those moments,
or you're at work or something.
Yeah, butterflies, rainbows, bunnies, sip of coffee, all these pretty little things that I'm grateful for to get you through it.
Yeah.
But then the important thing is that when we have the time and the space to decompress and say, oh, what was that? Like, where was that trigger coming from? That's the doing the work.
Yeah.
And again, we can say that we're grateful for a lot of things. And I hear this with my clients all the time, and I'll call them out on it, where you can see this kind of like forced smile and they're like, but I'm grateful that I have a job. And it's like, if you aren't happy with your job right now, like you don't have to fake being grateful. Like, why don't we move through that anger first? Why don't we look at where all this is coming from?
And if we're not looking at the things that are feeling misaligned in our lives or the trauma that we're holding on to, the challenging emotions that we have, no amount of gratitude journaling is going to make you feel good long term.
No.
Yeah, you're going to have to do, well, I don't even want to say you're going to have to do a lot of gratitude journaling because you'll be doing it, but it won't be feeling like anything
shifting. We need to go deeper than the surface.
Yeah.
And gratitude is really a learned, like embodied experience. I mean, not even to say learned, like remembering, right?
Yeah.
But when we are in our trauma, when we're in our stories, when that's in our nervous system, it's in our fascia, it's in our subconscious, no amount of trying to hack that with your brain and positive journaling or gratitude practices is going to change what your body and your energetic field is putting out there. Which is like, no, I'm not really grateful for the fact that, let's just say somebody just lost their job, and it's like, oh, well, be grateful that you still have a roof over your head right now, or something like that. And it's like, but no, I'm not really grateful for that because I just lost my job.
Yeah.
Right? So sit with that emotion first. And really feel it. And then you can start to ask yourself, okay, well, if I lost this job, God never takes away anything that's meant for us.
Yeah.
Right? So I always like to say that rejection is God's redirection. Okay, so this job wasn't meant for me. So what is it that I really want to be doing that is in alignment with me, that I've been sitting on, that I've been complacent? Right, to tie that into our earlier lesson, because I was complacent in this job. That's why God removed it for me. And so then when you actually give yourself that opportunity to sit, to feel, to kind of decipher and go through it, then that's when you can actually start to see the reason behind things and this beautiful opportunity. And then that's when you can say, oh, actually, like, I am grateful that this job was removed from me. But if you just say, lost my job, find something else to be grateful for.
That's a form of like bypassing, spiritual bypassing, and not going deep. And true gratitude, so would be to have gratitude almost zooming out and looking at the whole journey, and almost looking at that, coming right back to like soul growth, right? And it's like having gratitude for how all of this is set up, and it's almost guiding us into healing and going deeper and into soul growth, and starting to see that.
100%. And just for all of our listeners, I always like to share personally, so we're not just these like people in a seat preaching to you. But I remember having a terrible boss working at one of the restaurants that I worked at, and he was making his personality so obvious, like the truth of his personality, which was that he was a very selfish, narcissistic person. This person actually, I'm not going to say owes me money, but never paid me some of my money from working there. And I remember my mentor at the time saying, you should be grateful that he's showing you who he really is. And I was like, that sounds so stupid. That sounds so stupid, right? And because to just say you should be grateful, there was a bypassing that was happening, meaning like I missed the step of seeing, okay, it's because I'm not meant to work in the restaurant industry anymore. Right? But once I could see that God was making it really obvious that I need to get out, I was really grateful, because it pushed me out of a place where I didn't belong anymore. And so now, because I've been practicing this for so long, it doesn't take me long when bad things are happening to me to say, okay, this is going to be a beautiful opportunity. Something really great is going to come out of this. But I remember being like, fuck you, this bad thing that happened, I'm not grateful for it. I don't have to be grateful for it. Just for anybody who's like listening right now and kind of in the thick of it.
Absolutely.
Kind of sit with these practices that we just talked about, of like, feel it and actually start to ask, okay, if this thing has been removed from my life, where was the misalignment, and where's the opportunity to be aligned?
And it's interesting that you said like that incident helped to move you out of the restaurant industry, because my experience was very similar with nursing, where it was a critical incident that finally I reached, because it was giving me all sorts of signs, in nursing, where, you're working shift work, and I had insomnia, and I just knew that it didn't like light me up fully, right? I had these nudging feelings, but it's in terms of financially comfortable. So to think about leaving that. So it was finally another critical incident, because they're easy to happen in nursing, but finally one happened where I was like, it really woke me up, where I was like, whoa, the healthcare system does not their goal is not like to protect the nurses in these situations. It's almost a system that
or even the patients.
Yeah, or the patients. Yeah. It's not set up in a way that truly protects the workers and the patients. And I realized that that was kind of the final wake up call for me, where I was like, you know what, this might not be worth it in terms of, and in terms of like trauma as well. I was just like, a lot can happen in this job, and is it worth it if it's not actually what speaks to your soul, you know, what lights you up?
Yeah.
But yeah, terrifying to make a shift, but
and to tie some of these lessons together, like you had enough self-love to leave.
Yes.
You had enough self-compassion to parent yourself through the guilt of doing that.
Yes.
And you had the patience to persevere.
And I can tie in another one, overcoming sight, in terms of the challenges, because that was the period where I was really practicing manifestation. And I was practicing so strongly to believe that what you put out into, like, the vibration that you're sitting in and what you're putting out matters more than what you can see in your reality currently. And I like diligently practiced that for almost like, well, it's been 6 years now, but at that time it was like a year and a half of doing that. And I really practiced tapping, which we can get into in another episode. But those practices like got me through that transition, basically.
Yeah.
Because there was so much fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. Humility.
Oh, humility. Humility is a big one.
They're all big ones.
We said we were going to do this quickly.
I should have known.
I can actually explain humility quite simply, though, in 2 phrases. Humility is accepting that everything is given by God, and humility doesn't come at a cost.
Okay, what does that second one mean?
So there's been this kind of martyr-esque messaging that has been passed down to us generation to generation that teaches us that to be humble is to be small.
Right, yes, right? Absolutely.
So blue collar work is more humble than white collar jobs. And that how that plays into the martyr is this self-sacrificial piece of yourself, because you believe that makes you a better person, and that people will like respect you more for being that way. So whether you were born piss poor or filthy rich, God loves you all the same.
Yeah, you're equally worthy.
You're equally worthy. And it's accepting that everything that you were given by God.
Right.
So if you were given this life, you were given this life by God.
Yeah.
If you were given the rich life, you were given to it by God.
And it all goes back to soul growth.
Yes.
Because that's the experience you need to be having.
And also, I always say 2 sides of the same coin. There's no better or worse in these experiences. There's just a different nuance to the lesson. Okay? So a simple example of this as we pertain to rich and poor, and it'll trigger, but that's fine. Poor people have an easier time building relationships oftentimes. Why? A couple reasons. A lot of people feel really good about themselves if they're helping somebody who's less than them.
That's fair. Yeah.
And we know that they aren't after anything because we don't have anything to give. So we actually believe that they like us for who we are.
Okay.
Where people who are, we'll just talk about born into money. Oftentimes, well, one more thing about not being born into money is that because you haven't been given answers, you tend to build resiliency. These people tend to build resiliency. And that means that because they weren't given things, they were, again, had the opportunities to learn these lessons for themselves. Their growth wasn't taken away from them. A lot of people who were born into money didn't have the same opportunities to grow and discover themselves. A lot of them feel like they were just put in this box and, okay, you're just going to run daddy's company one day, right? And so there actually tends to be a huge lack of self-esteem in people who are born into money.
Yep.
Because they haven't been given the opportunity to believe in themselves.
Right.
And also a lot of times they have a hard time trusting people because they think that people are just after them for what they can provide for them. And then we have this in-between experience of the people who started here and moved here. And they're the ones who are experiencing the full spectrum of it to recognize that actually neither is better or worse.
Interesting.
Right? Because as I started to grow past my, helplessness and my poor financial state, the people who were helping me now feel insecure that they can't help me anymore.
Right.
And now there's some jealousy and some tension. And we see this without money as well, just in general. A lot of times
you
when
can see
people
it with
are
healing and stuff too.
Yes.
Yep.
A lot of times when people are growing, the people in their life start to feel like they're helpless.
Yeah.
And their insecurities start to come out, and those insecurities get projected onto other people. Right? So humility is the absence of judgment entirely. Nobody is better or worse.
Right.
Whether
we're all just equal.
There's no real healed and unhealed.
Yeah.
Like, we're all just here for this journey, and none of us are meant to know what another person's journey is.
Right.
Right? And so when we're practicing humility, it's just accepting everything as is and not making it mean anything.
Yeah. Neutrality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This person is not better than me. I'm not better than this person. And the ability to kind of, because this will tie into the next one of like feeling joy as well. Because a bigger fear than like the fear of failure or any of that is really the fear of being seen. And so a lot of people are afraid to be seen in their happiness and in their abundance and in their joy.
Yep.
Right? But humility is accepting that if I was given this, it is mine.
Yeah.
Not because I'm better than anybody else, just because I was meant to have this experience.
Yeah.
And so just that one last point is, okay, well, but Laurie, there's so many people out there who have all this money and all this power and just aren't good people.
Right.
Right? They wouldn't be good people without it either. So as it pertains to money, because I find money and humility really kind of shine a light on each other. Money is an amplifier of what is already within.
Right.
Right? If you were a good person when you didn't have money, you'll be an even better person when you do have money.
Right.
Because it's just going to amplify what's already there.
Okay, that makes
sense.
sense.
So how can I have money and remain humble? You don't become attached to it. You just allow it to enhance what is innately within you.
I love that.
Yeah. And then as it pertains to joy and happiness, I'm not going to say that we're meant to be happy all the time in this life, but I do believe that you can reach a point where, again, even when bad things are happening, we don't feel the absence of happiness. Because we tend to think about it as it's like this, like mouse that we're trying to chase. And it's just escaping us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where that's not actually the case. Happiness is always around us.
Right.
At any moment in time, no matter what is happening, you can choose to see the glimmers instead of the triggers. You can choose to see the reflection of, the light as it creates rainbows on the glass. You can choose to see the dew in the grass in the early morning and find happiness in those little moments. But we think that happiness is this goal.
Right.
So we externalize it and we put it over here, and we say, to be happy, I need to be over here. To be happy, you need to be in the present.
Yep.
That's it.
And then I would say as well that when you work through different triggers and get to the root of them and practice healing those wounds within, then you can have experiences, say the same experience could happen before you look into it and you get this reaction because it comes from wounding, and then you do some inner work, and then the same experience happens and you don't have as such strong of a reaction.
100%.
And we've talked about this with examples. And I would say that's a great example of just showing how, and that it cannot affect you as much. And you stay more in a state of neutrality, right? Where it's like, this happened, but it's not hitting all my inner wounds. and I'm able to like maintain this more state of neutrality and a sense of happiness, I would say. Mm-hmm.
I used to be this person who would spill coffee first thing in the morning and say, fuck, it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah.
The day is ruined because it started off with a spilled cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Right? And now, like I just told you about this last weekend, it's like I can have all these hard conversations and all of these things happening while I'm like on vacation and not make it ruin my vacation anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, it's coming back to like the suffering is a choice, right? So it's really the more that we practice coming back to love, like feeling the feelings, but coming back to love, we shorten the period of time that we're in our suffering, meaning that we're recognizing that happiness is actually always available to us. We just have moments where we're not experiencing it.
Yeah.
Right? But people think that we have moments where we're experiencing happiness and the majority of the time we're not. Right?
Yeah.
Happiness is always available. We have moments when we're not experiencing it, but it's always there.
Yeah.
It's not this goal.
Yeah.
And then sharing is moving out of scarcity and into abundance.
Right.
So even us having a podcast here and essentially giving away all of this free, valuable information, where a lot of it can be found in our courses.
Right.
Right? Is having the emotional maturity and the understanding that actually this abundance is available to everybody, this knowledge is available to everybody, and that by sharing it, it's not going to take away from me.
Yeah.
Because when we haven't grown in sharing, when we're still really in that scarcity mindset, we like hold on to things really tight.
Yeah.
And it's a really tough way to live, to almost feel like everybody's out to get you.
Yep.
And I even remember, like, because I was a chef for 10 years, and a lot of people were like, oh, like, would you share my recipe? Like, I've never been afraid to share my recipes.
Yeah.
I'm always like, yeah, here, take it, use it, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But a lot of people hide their recipes under lock and key.
Yeah.
Because they don't want somebody else to do it or potentially do it better than them. Which, again, you can see how that ties into some of the humility as well. So although they are separate, a lot of them really play off of each other as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then, so do we want to move into how this relates to raising consciousness?
Yeah, take it away.
So soul growth, in a lot of my teachings, I teach it. It's funny because you do like a really nice zoom out with a lot of your teachings, and mine are also going there, which is really exciting. But I love to also zoom in, which you do too. And when we zoom in on, say, this lifetime, right? Yeah. We are looking at, I love to teach the scale of consciousness and the path of raising consciousness. Yeah. So when I found it in a nice diagram, of course, that made my type A personality and structured personality delighted. Because if anyone hasn't looked up the scale of consciousness, I highly recommend Googling it. Google the scale of consciousness, and you will find a nice little diagram with all the emotions found at different levels. They're measured at different levels. So basically, everything is energy.
And all energy has frequency.
Yes, and all energy has frequency, and this includes emotions. So basically, all of the emotions that are moving throughout us and within us and that are stored within our tissues, and coming from the past as well, because we store a lot of emotion within our bodies and our energetic field from the past, all of this has a vibration to it. And more, I want to say, challenging emotions are lower frequency and they are more dense. So this makes sense as to if you're struggling with depression, then you can literally feel heavier. Yeah. And a lot of this has been researched a lot lately, coming out in like Dr. Gabor Mate. He talks about how, and the body keeps the score, right? All emotional energy can manifest itself out into the body in specific conditions. things like that. And I think the best way to tangibly view it is something like a tumor in your body, right? Where emotional energy can literally manifest into a physical tumor. And that is showing then density. Like that has literally become this in your body, and it is so dense, right?
Yeah. Even tears, I always say, is like, what more proof do you need that emotions can manifest physically when like you feel sad and your eyes start leaking?
There's water coming out of your eyes. Yeah, it has become a manifested substance. Yeah, absolutely. So when we have things from the past that we're not looking at, and we're storing a lot of these emotions within us, yes, we can literally feel heavier, lethargic, more dense. And then as you do different healing work, which I love to explain it in my little 4-part framework of things that help on the healing path. The first one, I call them the 4 R's. So the first one is reflection. So I really believe that in order to heal and to grow and to raise consciousness, we need to be slowing down, which we talked about, and reflecting in some way, like asking, why is this triggering me? And this can be done through journaling, through slowing down and meditating, through just asking those important questions, or asking like, why isn't this feeling aligned with me anymore? But basically, you need to slow down and you need to start asking yourself these deeper questions, right?
Yeah.
And then the second one is release. So emotional and energetic release. When we have these denser emotional energies within us, they need to be felt, like we've talked about, and they need to be released in some way. So great practices for release are emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, breath work's a great one. But then there's so many other ones that people wouldn't think about, like even journaling is a form of emotional and energetic release. Things like boxing, yelling, even just like, I'm
pushing
hitting
a wall.
Pushing up against a wall, banging on the floor, all of these. Like if you feel anger, sometimes it needs to be expressed and released. Writing out in a safe and controlled manner. Yes, absolutely.
We have to put the caveat in there.
Yeah, which is what retreats are great for, where you can explore all of these emotions and you can practice release in a safe and controlled way. And breath work is a great one for release in terms of, I find it is one of the greatest modalities to release things that you didn't even know were within you.
Oh my God, it's so wild.
Because we've had countless experiences on retreats and our day retreats when we're facilitating breath work, and clients, when they're sharing at the end, they just say like, this came up, I didn't even know that like this was bothering me, or grief from something. I remember my very first breath work class, I relived the grief the moment I found out my brother passed away. And I had like a same crying episode as I did when I first found out, but I had unprocessed grief within me that needed to be released again. Yeah. And when I'm stressed, sometimes when I do breath work, right away, now it can happen like on the first song, where it's like you just start crying on the first song and it gets out, and then it can shift into like a wonderful practice sometimes of like just more peace and bliss and happiness.
I also just wanted to share that sometimes, like, because we do store it like in our fascia, I know people who have even had like very, very repressed traumas come into their awareness while they're like at the gym. Or working out or doing yoga. Just to kind of share, like, to be aware of that, if anybody listening has experienced that, like it is normal. And it's a beautiful opportunity to just be with that emotion that is, because basically, like, if it's coming up, it's ready to be released.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some people can be afraid of practices like breath work because they're like, what's going to come up? But I always tell people, if it's coming up, it means it's ready. It's ready to come up. It's wanting your attention. It wants to be looked at and released, basically. And another great one that combines these two, reflection and release, as well as the next one, is the inner child work and the internal family systems. because it really walks you through the reflection process of looking at, okay, this is triggering me in some way. Why? Like, let's dive deep. What parts, and we'll have a whole episode on this, but what parts are getting triggered here and why? And then it can guide you into what's called an unburdening process of these belief systems. The third R is reprogramming. So reprogramming your mind in ways, and I actually like to refer to this now as actually more coming back to our true essence, right? It's reprogramming yourself back to love.
Yeah, unprogramming.
Unprogramming, unlearning, unconditioning. A lot of non-dual teachers call it the unconditioned mind, which is our true essence, basically. So practices that have actually helped me reprogram. Manifestation was actually a big one, which I always like to teach people that manifestation isn't necessarily like pretending you're something. It's actually starting to feel more of your true essence. And then what you can see is reality actually starts to shift. And then you do actually start to feel that way. And it's your true self, you know? So a lot of people don't like manifestation for that reason. They don't like feeling like they're faking something. But you're actually so stuck in your wounding and your programming that's why it feels fake.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because we talked about it with the gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Like, if it feels like you're faking it, it's an invitation to look a little deeper into that wound.
Yeah, exactly. And then reparenting is a great way of reprogramming as well, which basically involves healing the wounded parts within you and from a place of your true essence, and providing to them the love, the encouragement, the compassion, basically all the things, the 7 lessons. It's funny the connections we make on when we're just chatting with each other. We're like, oh yeah, that connects. But your true essence is actually reparenting your wounded parts who are kind of stuck in younger versions of yourself and guiding you back to your true essence. So that's reprogramming. And the fourth one is receiving. So I feel it's
people struggle with this.
Yeah. I like to say it, it's like, when the time that you spend on healing work and inner work, none of it will go unanswered. That's kind of like how I like to say it and present it. Sometimes when we're doing healing work, it doesn't feel like we're getting something right in the moment, right? We're like, I'm doing all this work. Where is my moment of where's happiness? Kind of going back to chasing happiness. But every single moment that you spend in healing work, it will get answered, whether it's in that moment, you can have a shift in feeling something, right? You can feel a moment of more inner peace, love, or whether it's actually 3 weeks later, or whether it's actually 3 months later. And this is why sticking with healing practices over a period of time ends up having this cumulative effect. And then you can actually shift your life quite radically, and you're receiving, basically you're receiving, you're reaping the benefits, the rewards of all that work. And I like to say receiving can come in all different forms. It can come in, like I said, it can come in a feeling of more peace. It could come in synchronistic moments. So when I started practicing manifestation, holy cow, interesting things started happening that I was like, that was weird. And you start meeting, even the way we met, and you start meeting people, and you get connected to the right teachers, the right next thing, and things can just feel like they start to fall in your lap. So I really feel that when you start to do this healing work, when you also start to form a relationship with spirit, source, God, whatever people refer to that power as, if you take time to form a relationship and start communicating to that energy, you will receive back.
It was such a small but fun, beautiful story from one of my students when I was running a round of surrender, where I was talking about that everything that we want, we will be given, we will be provided for, right? And it's just kind of asking and following the nudges and trusting. And this woman comes onto the call the next week because my example previously had been that I needed to repot 2 of my plants at home. I really just didn't want to go and buy the pots. and I took my dogs for a walk that night. I heard to turn down a different street that I wasn't going to turn down, so I did, and there were 2 pots sitting on the road.
There you go.
And so I was like, thank you.
Yeah,
right?
thank you.
Because the key is to actually accept that what you asked for was delivered for you, and it's here for you to receive it.
Yeah.
Because I could have easily just been like, oh, I'm going to walk right past them.
Yeah, right.
And so the next day,
yeah,
she was getting on the subway to work, and she was so thirsty. And she says, I sat down in a seat that I don't normally sit in, like this area of the subway. And I turn over, and there's an iced tea bottle sitting next to me. And she was like, if the seal cracks, like if it hasn't been opened, I'm going to drink it.
Yeah.
And so she did. The seal hadn't been cracked. It was just this brand new iced tea bottle that somebody else bought and forgot on the train.
Right.
And that's how God works. And I think people really struggle to believe this, but if you can just play into the illogical for a while.
Yeah.
And you and I talk about this all the time of like, if you could just give it 3 months, like a little 3-month challenge.
The 3-month experiment.
Yeah.
I always tell clients this.
Right? It's almost like, let's have a little competition with my brain, with my ego mind. To be like, let's just see.
Yeah.
Because this is how God works, is it's like, he's omnipresent, like here all the time with everybody, all the time. Okay, so this woman is thirsty. She needs a drink. So I'm going to have this person buy a drink and forget it on the train.
Yeah.
So that she can find it.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people who are like, that sounds crazy. But I promise you, just try it for long enough. And you'll see that that really is how it works, is we are all being guided. And the way that we receive is through others.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're working like a 9-to-5 job and you think that your company is signing your paycheck, like it's not coming from your company. It's coming from all of the individuals who are paying for, you know, the hydro or paying for the schooling or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Right? Our abundance is always because it's shared.
Right. Yeah.
Because God is guiding us to be this way.
Yeah.
So.
And that really happened with a lot of the retreat properties that we've held retreats at. When I started putting out to the universe that I wanted to run retreats. And a few short months later, retreat locations were delivered to me. Like I didn't even have to go searching. The majority of retreat places I have not researched. They have literally come to me through like DMs and stuff like that. And I'm like,
so cool.
Mind blown. Like what? Yeah. And so the 4 R's, the reflecting, releasing, reprogramming, and receiving, that really relates back to the path of raising consciousness. Because if you show up to healing work over a period of time, we like to say, the 3-month experiment, like really dedicate yourself for 3 months before assessing, like, is this shifting anything? If you do this over time, you can see a shifting of your level of consciousness. And that's really been the case for me, where when I pull up that little diagram, I can see, oh yeah, back in my early 20s, I was really sitting at, like, the majority of my energy was in this very depressed, lethargic, anxious, angry state. Well, anger is even a step up. Yeah. But over time and over the years, I've really shifted to move into higher states of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I was in the, resentful victim.
Yes, which are also very, Shame is one of the lowest vibrations on that scale.
Yeah.
So anytime you are criticizing yourself, anytime you're shaming yourself, you are literally feeding your body the lowest level of energy.
Poison.
Yeah.
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 Well, I think that's going to be a lot for our listeners to chew and digest.
That was a lot of info. So that was all about the soul growth, and the path of raising consciousness. So thank you everyone for joining us for episode 2, and we will see you back on the Naked Soul podcast.
Yes, and if you are interested in joining any retreats, we have a few retreats coming up.
True.
One in Lewiston, New York, called the Soul Expansion Retreat, happening November 22nd to 24th of 2024, as well as a few other international retreats that can all be found on our websites, linked in the description of this episode.